notice there's no balloons, that's because it's May. Do you know, I think we're the only study open still. Did you know that? Yeah, I think I've talked to everyone else who does studies, and they're like, oh yeah, we shut down in April, so we're kind of awesome. Yeah, but we're kind of tired. So now as the time goes on, the balloons get less and less. Like the first one in September, you'll see like big balloons of bouquets. Now there's none, okay? We're just tired of it. So that's what's happening. So let's just nix the June. We will meet next week, and then we will be done until September. So I know that kind of it's probably, maybe it's not sad to you. It's not sad to me, I don't think. So it'll be good. And then when we come back, we'll figure out whatever. So if you are joining us on Roku or online, last week, if you were wondering where we really were here. But unfortunately, like the entire electrical system in the theater went out. So someone just came up and said, did I miss the handout for last week? And I said, nope, same one. Because we couldn't even do the study because everything went dark and no electricity at all. I think it happened all down the street, so I took a break, which actually works out really good because we'll be here today and next week, and we're going to do a 2-part series on the disciples because now Jesus just is going to call his disciples today, and we're going to talk about what they were like and how they're kind of like us. They should be like us. And so I kind of want to talk about that, but it's going to take 2 weeks to do that. So if you need the handout, we're changing our web address. I don't know if you know that. We're going to go with connectwithfaith.com. We'll always still have the Connecting the Dots Ministries, but Connect with Faith is a lot simpler for people. So the handouts are online at connectwithfaith.com. So, okay, if you are new here, which is kind of great if you're new and it's 1 week before we're ending, we're glad you're here. But we are going through the Gospel of Luke. It's taken us a year to get through 6 chapters. So we're going really slow. We're learning as we go along different things and the whole purpose of it is to see the life and words of Jesus and how that will change our lives, since that's what that's supposed to do. So I want to talk today and next week about what it means to be a follower or a disciple of Christ, because now Jesus is getting ready to call 12 men to be his closest associates. And I want to talk today about what that looks like and how that can apply to our life, because I think there's this false sense out there that says when I come to Jesus, or maybe I can't even come to Jesus until I get my life squared away. I need to know my Bible. I need to at least have read it once all the way through. I need to be really loving and compassionate, and I need to never doubt, and I need to never sin, and those are the things that I need to do before I can come to Christ. And so what we want to do today is dispel that and say that's absolutely not true. You don't have to go to seminary. You don't have to go to Bible college. You don't always have to trust God. I mean, at the beginning, it's like you're a baby is kind of what happens. And then you'll grow, and it will move on from there. But I want to put that misconception to rest, because I think that we'll see that today, that from the men that Jesus chose, they were a complete blank slate. Like they really didn't know it. They were fishermen. They were tax collectors. They weren't Bible scholars. There was nothing in them that would be that you and I would choose if we were going to choose 12 men to change the world. So let's start in Luke 6, verse 12. It was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles: Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip, Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Now, John MacArthur wrote a book that I will quote a couple times in here. It should be in your handout. He wrote a book called 12 Ordinary Men. And if you really want to know more about these guys, it's a really good book. He goes in a lot of detail. But this is what he writes, and I like it. He says, John MacArthur wrote a book called 12 Ordinary Men. He starts it with these words: if you were going to recruit a team to alter the course of history, how would you begin? Jesus began with a walk by the lake. Follow me, the master told them, and they did. Thus began his uncommon mission with 12 most common individuals, men who would become Christ's very first disciples. Have you ever considered who Jesus didn't choose for his inner circle? He didn't select a rabbi. He didn't recruit scholars. He didn't look within the religious establishment to build his team. any of these would have given him an inside track with those in power. Instead, he assembled a ragtag bunch of folks with unimpressive resumes. Jesus wasn't looking for religious superiority or extraordinary talent. Jesus wanted ordinary people, people with hopes and dreams of their own, but people who were willing to leave their lives behind to follow the Savior, people like you. So I love that. It's like he's taking people just like you and me, and he's going to put us on a mission to go out and tell people about him. Now, if you're new, we started in Luke, and we went through the whole thing, like the birth of Jesus, and then Jesus gets baptized, and then he starts going out and preaching and teaching and healing and casting out demons and all those things. But what happened is there's droves of people that are following him at this point. So it's not like these 12 are just the 12 disciples. There's a lot of people that have come to know him, that are following him, and that are sharing him with other people at this point. And so what we come across is a time where things are now going to change for Jesus. Now it's not going to be the thousands upon thousands of people. Now he's going to focus on 12, and these 12 are going to go out into the world and change the world for the better for all of us. Now, think about this. There's probably 2 years left of Jesus' life. 2 years. And then he's going to be crucified, and he has to leave his mission with these people who know nothing. And it's kind of shocking. I had one of my kids come to me the other day, and they said, "Mom, I'm really just struggling in my faith today." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Why is it like," and we've gone through this a million times, "why is it that why are we right and everyone else is wrong?" And so I start giving him a list. Well, Jesus, died on the cross, resurrected. No one else has done that. And then it dawned on me. I said, "You know what? Even better than that," I said, in 2 years, which is less time than it would take you or me to get a Bible degree going to school, in 2 years, God changed these men's lives to where we know 2,000 years later we have the gospel, we have everything we need to come to know Christ and be saved because of these 12 men who came with nothing, a blank slate. And to me, that says a lot about God, because if it were just some movement, if you think of all the really wacky religious movements, they just kind of peter out, and that's just the way it does. It's just that they don't last. But because it's God, he's going to make sure that it lasts, and it did, and he used these 12 men. And I kind of think that that is a big miracle, that they turn this world upside down. So I was thinking, when John MacArthur said, if you were going to recruit a team to alter the course of history, how would you begin? Now, it would seem to me that a mission on this size, it would take Jesus putting out, I need your resume, it would be his first thing. I need to know how many times you have attended synagogue. Have you memorized the Torah? Because that's really important. You're going to need to know the Bible backwards and forwards. And so I think it's this huge undertaking and yet Jesus didn't do any of those things. And that's what is so shocking. I was thinking about Jesus taking time out of his schedule before he does this. He does the one thing that's the most important, that is going to be pray. And I think it's a great reminder that when we make big decisions in our life, it's really important to spend that time and get alone and pray. And we learned this at our marriage class last night. We had a great speaker. And if you didn't see it, go online and watch that, because it's really good. But he was talking about when you have issues in your marriage, how important it is to really just pray, to take all those issues and just give them to God, just give them over to him. And I think sometimes we don't do that. And I was listening this week to Stephen Furtick. He's in Elevation Church back east. And it was so cool. He was talking about Peter walking on water. And he came up with something in Mark, and I went to look at it, and it actually does say this. There's a big crowd of people, and Jesus is preaching, and then he sends the disciples on, okay? So Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray, and then he sees the disciples rowing, and it's exhausting, and there's a storm, and so Jesus is walking on water to get to them, but the Bible says that his intention was to walk on, or to walk by them. And you're thinking, why would Jesus walk by them in this big storm? But then it says that the disciples cried out to him, and then he turned around, stopped, and helped them. And sometimes I think, and I know for me, I tend to just know God is in control. So I don't spend a lot of time crying out to him for things. But I think it's a reminder that if you have a really serious problem or issue or a bad marriage or something, you need to spend that time crying out to him. Because sometimes I think it takes us crying out for him to stop and say, okay, now you're ready to listen to me if you're crying out to me. So I just thought about that. Anyway, so if you're going to make big decisions, where you're going to go to school, who you're going to marry, we need to handle it just like Jesus did, which means we have to take the time to spend in prayer and say, God, what do you want me to do? Because that's a big part of being a disciple, not what I want to do, what do you want to do? I just got a text from someone yesterday, and she's got a lot of really bad stuff happening in her life, and she said, I'm just this is what I want. And every time I pray and God doesn't give it to me, he just slams me. And I wrote her back, and it made me really sad because I thought, your best bet is to surrender. Like, surrender everything, whatever you want, surrender that to him. And let him do what he needs to do in your life. And instead of saying, this is what I want, God, and if you don't give it to me, I'm going to be angry with you. We've got to turn that around and say, God, I want what you want. And I was wondering if Jesus had like 24 people that he was looking at. He's like, I like Bob, and I like Carl, but God, who do you want? And then by the time, he's probably thinking, Peter, are you joking? Like, Peter's kind of a loudmouth. I don't want him on my team. But he did what God called him to do. So I was thinking about Cheyenne the other day. She liked this guy, and we told her, well, then we don't really think it's a great relationship, but we know she's in high school and whatever. And so we sat down and talked to her about it, and we said, if you want to get back together with them, that's fine. These are our concerns. And she said, I'm just going to pray about it. And I was really proud of her because I'm like, she's in high school. And if we can just get to that point to say, this is a big decision, and I'm going to pray and see what God wants, not so much what I want. So that was just a reminder. Anyway, okay, disciples. He think about it, there's thousands following him. He's going to pick 12. Now, the word disciple means learner or student. So basically, when you and I become a Christian, that's what we become, a learner and a student. And now it's our job to go out and learn and study and grow. And it doesn't just stop with, Jesus, will you come in my heart? It doesn't stop there. Now it's this learning process that we go through. And I think that's a natural thing to happen. And some people don't think that. They're like, I asked Jesus in my heart, I'm going to heaven, and there's nothing that happens after. And that's not natural. I want you to know that. I know I've told you this 1,000,000 times, but it's the only thing I can think of. When God changed my life, I call it my Cabo moment, because I was in Cabo when it happened. But when I realized what God really wanted from me and what it meant to be a Christian, I could not get enough of reading books. I devoured Max Lucado books. I devoured every John MacArthur cassette. They were cassettes back then, which tells you how old I am. R.C. Sproul. I don't know if anyone knows R.C. Sproul. So deep. I can't even imagine now listening to him that I even understood him back then. But God put all these really deep, deep theologian people in my life, and I just devoured them because I wanted to know God so desperately. And I think that, and then God gave me James MacDonald, where I got to calm down a little bit, and now I listen to other people. But that's the whole point, is that when you come to Christ, now you're going to learn about him. You're not going to be at a standstill. So we see this phase in the life of Peter. If you think about it, when we saw Peter, he's the first disciple that we're going to talk about. He saw Jesus, and remember, he invited Jesus to his house. They were at the synagogue together, so they hung out. And then at some point he decided, well, I'm going to believe in Jesus, and that's fine. But then there was a point when Jesus said, Peter, I want you to come and follow me. And there's going to be a change in Peter's life, because most of us, we go to jobs, we have our work, and we're a disciple, and we can be a disciple at our work. But there's some people that God calls and says, you're going to be an apostle. An apostle means sent out messenger. So there's kind of two different things. And the apostles and the messengers are going to be the ones that are maybe a missionary to Africa, or people that are sent out to go in full-time ministry. And that's what Jesus is asking of all of these men. Now, if I were Jesus, I would have gotten ahead of the game. I would have said, you know what? I just want someone who is naturally compassionate, naturally just loves everyone, because I only got 2 years to train them. So if they already have that, we're good to go. I would look for people who are naturally selfless. They just care about other people. Naturally trustworthy, like I can just trust them with anything. I would look for people who have been to seminary, Bible college, so that, I wouldn't have to train them because they already know. I would look for someone who knew how to pray. Like they just know how to pray. A problem? Let's get on our knees and pray because we trust God. I would look for someone who was a believer for a long time, because if you're a believer, you've gone through storms and you know how to trust God. I would look for someone like that. I would look for someone who's never fearful. Like we don't need someone who's fearful on our team, because if you're fearful, then people aren't going to want to come to me if they're fearful, and so we don't want that. And then, of course, you want someone that has, integrity and character, because if I were Jesus, if I would have 2 years to teach them about heaven and hell and sin and repentance and baptism. There's a lot of stuff that Jesus has to teach these guys. And so I would get ahead of the game, but Jesus doesn't do that. And that's what I love about him, because he has 2 years to train these guys. And I was think of the people that you and I know, and maybe it's even ourselves. We've been a Christian 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And these guys learned everything they needed to know. In 2 years, they were just rocking this world for Jesus. And we don't see that very much anymore. So if I were Jesus, I'd pick people who would have already had a foundation of belief to build on. But Jesus comes along and says, yep, that's just not how I do things in life. Look at 1 Corinthians 1:26. Paul says this, "For consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. And the base things of the world and the despised God has chosen, the things that are not, so that he may nullify the things that are, so that no man may boast before God." Because see, if he would have picked all the religious people of the day, they would have gone, yeah, I'm so smart, and God chose me because I'm just brilliant, because I'm a good studier. And he's like, I don't want people like that. I want to take people from A and make them B, and say that I'm only B now because of the power of God. That's it. Has nothing to do with me. And I think it makes me realize that God's not looking for smart, intellectual, natural-born leaders with an A+ in like public speaking. He's not looking for that. He's looking for people who are weak and powerless to do anything. And then he can come into their lives and transform them by his Spirit, and then nobody can take credit for it except God. And that's God's way of doing things. So if you're here and you're like, yeah, I kind of feel like a nobody, you're like, yes, that's perfect. That's exactly what God's looking for. If you're like, I just don't have a Bible degree, perfect. You don't need one. I just kind of fear all the time. Great. You are God's specialty. So see, we have a skewed version of what God is looking for, when in fact, he's looking for normal, ordinary people just like you and me. Works really, really great. We watch a show called Numbers. I don't know, we found it on Netflix. It must have been, have you ever seen? Yeah, it's good. Anyway, it's an FBI agent and his brother's a mathematician, okay, brilliant. I can't even think of the word now. They say words I've never even heard of, okay, but his whole life is all about knowledge and how much more knowledgeable and solving math problems, and everything is knowledge. And one of them was about God, and he absolutely cannot believe in faith, in God, nothing, because in his mind, he has to have this rational answer for everything. And it made me sad, but it reminded me of this verse that says, to him, the Bible and Jesus seems foolish, but God says, I'm using foolish things to bring people to myself. So it's just completely opposite of what the world says. Okay, in Jesus' day, we had religious men, and remember how Jesus couldn't stand them because they used their religious upbringing thinking that was what God was after, but it's not. So I think the bottom line for Jesus is he's looking for people that are not dependent on themselves. Like, I can't be dependent on myself for anything. I think he's looking for people who are like sponges, who are like, God, I'm just blank slate here. I'm a sponge. You just pour everything into me, and I'm going to learn and grow, and then we're going to go out and change the world. That's what he's looking for. And I love people who were never raised in any religion. I think they're the lucky ones, because those of us that were raised in churches that had rules and regulations, and you have to do this and you have to do that, if someone comes to Christ and they're like, they open their Bible and they have no background. Oh, that was pretty. They have no background of what they can and can't do. No one told them to do this and that. Now they just have the Bible and the Spirit of God showing them what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And there's no guilt over things like, oh, my mom told me I should never go to a movie. Okay, my mom told me I should never eat pork or whatever. Oh, and they don't have that as new believers. So that's what I think Jesus is looking for, is people that just say, okay, God, here I am, blank slate, now use me. So John MacArthur says in his book, God's favorite instruments are nobodies, so that no man can boast before God. In other words, God chooses whom he chooses in order that he might receive the glory. He chooses weak instruments so that no one will attribute the power to human instruments rather than to God, who wields those instruments. Such a strategy is unacceptable to those whose whole pursuit in life is aimed towards the goal of human glory. So if you're here and you're like, I just want to be somebody, he's like, yeah, I can't really use you. But if you're saying, I just want to be who you want me to be, and you change me, then he's like, great, I can use you now. It's all about just being humble. So Jesus is pulling together a team of men who are completely different. So in this room, we have completely different women, and that's a good thing. He's pulling together, he's got two sets of brothers who are all fishermen, and they were in the same town, so they were probably all really good friends. He's got Levi, or Matthew, we learned a couple weeks ago, who's a tax collector, who's hated by most of the Jewish people. He's a Jewish turncoat. He worked for the Roman government, so he probably was a loner because not many people probably liked him. We see one of the guys is Simon the Zealot, and he's almost like, in our term, we would think like a terrorist. It would be like putting a Palestinian and a Jewish man together to just be on the same team. Okay, I mean, that's what this team that Jesus is pulling together is like, because the Zealots hated the Romans with everything in them, and their goal was to overthrow the Roman government. And so they were kind of violent about the things that they did. So all the rest of these guys came from different occupations to pull together. We don't even know what a lot of them did. But we do know that Jesus took this team and pulled them together and changed them from the inside out, which is God's specialty with you and with me. He's saying, I'm going to take you as nothing and build you into something so awesome if you let me. And the great thing about these 12 is that they spent these last 2 years of Jesus' life and let him just pour into him. And they started out one way, and they came out a different way. Even though they still had these traits in them, God changed them. So I want to look at each one of the men. So the first one we're going to talk about is Simon Peter, verse 14. Simon, who he also named Peter. And so if you're here and you have a big mouth and you talk a lot and you usually stick your foot in your mouth, you're going to be glad to know that the very first person, the head of these 12, is somebody just like that. And that's not a bad thing, but he was bold and outspoken and eager, and he always spoke before thinking. And the great thing about Peter is that he always vacillated between his I really want to do the things that God wants me to do, but my flesh is just, I just do what my flesh wants. And there's always this battle. And so for those of you and me that struggle with that, like, I want to do the right thing and I don't want to gossip, but oops, I kind of slipped and said that out of my mouth about that person. And I want to do this way, but this and you're constantly in this battle and this struggle between the two. That's kind of what Peter was like. Peter was different. He was so contradictory. It's like, oh, Jesus, I'm going to walk on water with you. Just call me out there. And he gets on the water and then he freaks out and falls, okay? He's like, oh, I will never, ever leave you, Jesus. And then 5 seconds later, he's like, I don't know him. I mean, Peter just has this crazy life back and forth. And yet he's the leader for these 12 people. And Jesus said, I'm going to take you, Peter, with your personality, and I'm going to change you. I was glad to know, Peter helped me last week. I woke up last Tuesday. I was doing the marriage class on Tuesday night. I woke up annoyed with every person that came into my contact that day. Like, I can't even tell you why. I don't know what my problem was. I was so grumpy, and we went to set up the marriage class, and everything wasn't ironed right, and then I was frustrated, and I'm trying to iron, and I'm mad at Rob, and try doing that. You're trying to teach a marriage class about how to have a good marriage, and I'm so frustrated with him about everything, and he got home that night, and he's like, what's your problem today? I'm like, I don't know. It just, but it made me feel better about Peter, knowing that, Peter was like that too. Like, everyone has their days where they just can't wake up like that, and you just got to go with it. And so I was very happy to know that I was glad to have Peter as someone that I could look to say, thanks, Peter, I feel your pain. So Peter's name is mentioned more in the Gospels than any other name except Jesus, so he's kind of a big deal. Peter speaks the most. Jesus speaks to Peter the most. This is kind of funny. Peter is reprimanded by Jesus, and Peter reprimands Jesus, if you can even imagine that, but he really does. Peter confesses Jesus more boldly, but he denies Jesus also more boldly. So this is the kind of thing that Peter is. Jesus seems to be really a lot harder on Peter than anybody else, and I think it's because he saw so much in Peter, and he wanted so desperately to mold him into something, but there was a lot that he had to work out in his life. John MacArthur says in his book, all of that contributed to making him the leader Christ wanted him to be. God took a common man with an ambivalent, facilitating, impulsive, unsubmissive personality and shaped him into a rock-like leader, the greatest preacher among the apostles, and in every sense, the dominant figure in the first 12 chapters of Acts where the church was born. So he comes along, Jesus takes Peter, and in 2 years, he takes him from a fisherman to look at Acts 2:14 at Pentecost. After Jesus is resurrected and the early church starts, here's Peter. Acts 2:14. But Peter, taking his stand with the 11, raised his voice and declared to them, Men of Judea, and all of you who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and give heed to my words. So from 2:14 to 2:41, he preaches this magnificent the sermon about Jesus. You need Jesus, and he's the Savior, and you need to come to him, and he died for your sins. And look at chapter 2, verse 41. So then those who had received his word were baptized, and that day there were added 3,000 souls. Okay, 3,000 people in 2 years came to know Jesus because Peter said, I'm going to follow you, pour everything into my life, and then I'm going to take what you pour, and I'm going to go out there. So what we realize is Peter is far from perfect. Just like we're far from perfect, we're going to mess up, we're going to screw up. That's just life in the big city. In Galatians 2, he acted like a hypocrite. He arrogantly told Jesus he would never, ever deny him, but then, of course, he did. And then in John 13:8, he tells Jesus, you will never wash my feet. Could you imagine telling you're not doing that to me? Jesus is like, oh, yeah, no, trust me. I'm going to. But what Jesus did was take the personality of this man that God created and use that personality to further the gospel. I was at lunch with a couple girls the other day, and we were talking about husbands. And she said, my husband is just not very affectionate, let's just say. And maybe your husband is like too quiet, or maybe your husband is too loud, or maybe he's too whatever, fill in the blank for that. But it dawned on me that God created them that way. And we as women are not going to change them. So we need to stop trying to change our husbands. That's the one thing that I learned. We do need to pray that God will do with our husbands what he did with Peter. I look at my husband, and most of you know Rob is, if you know him, he's this like type A personality. He thinks of like, oh, I think we should do this business. He pours his whole life into this business and everything. And he sees this 30,000-foot view picture of everything that he wants to do. And so he wants to get things done, and he needs to get it done now, and he wants to get it done right. And so when we were in our marriage class, we were talking, and I said, we were talking about what is our biggest weaknesses. And he said his was impatience, which if you're a type A personality, that makes total sense. And that's what Peter was. It's like, I'm sure Peter was very impatient, but God could use that once it got tempered the right way. I was laughing when we first moved to the theater, and Rob and I were talking. It was a week before we started, and I said, Rob, we need some kind of a backdrop thing. And so I ran to Hobby Lobby, and I found this like little wooden thing about probably this high, and it had a little backdrop. And so I took him there, and I'm like, Rob, okay, we just got to do something so you can't see the screen. And, I didn't know what to do. And he was like, you've got to be kidding. We can't use that. And so he built this, okay? And in 1 week, he built this thing. He had paint flown in to make sure it's the right color, pink. And I mean, that's just how he thinks. Like, I'm thinking $39 for something to stand behind me. But that's just the difference between the two of us, is that God made him that way, and instead of squelching that, I need to say, okay, God made you that way, and now what's he gonna do with that because of the way that you are? So when we talked about what my greatest weakness was, I told him, I said, I think mine is that I think I'm right all the time, okay? But then I countered that with, I think all women think that, and I also think that we probably are right most of the time. So I don't know if it's just me, if it's just the whole women's race, but so we were walking, and I said, I don't know, if something's greatest strength is your greatest weakness, I wonder how that works out. And then it dawned on me that because I do this, I have to read, I have to study. When I get up here and talk about this stuff, I pretty much need to be right. And if I'm not, then that's kind of a bad thing, and you won't come back, and I shouldn't do it if it's not right. But then it dawned on me that it spills over into my marriage, of thinking that I need to be right in my marriage too, along with this. And so it's usually whatever your greatest strength is, it's also going to be your greatest weakness. And so now you've got this tension in your life, and I think that's what Peter was feeling. Now the problem is when we start saying things like, well, it's just the way I am. I mean, if Rob just sat around and said, well, I'm just impatient and I can't, you're just going to have to get over it, that would be a bad thing. If Peter would have said, I'm just the way I am, and left it at that, we would never have. I was just reading 1 Peter the other day. It was so shocking. 1 Peter, this is what Peter says. He spends his time with Jesus. He writes 1 and 2 Peter. And this is what one of the verses. God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. This is Peter. Okay? Big Mouth Peter writes, God gives grace to the humble, and I'm thinking, but because God didn't leave him back here where he was just a jerk, okay? He worked with him. Peter, you can't act like that. We're going to use this great big personality so you can go out and share the gospel, but you got to learn to be loving and patient with people and kind, and I'm not going to leave you back here. And the problem is we start thinking, well, God just made me that way, and you're not going to change me. I'm not going to change you, but hopefully, God's the only one that can change us. But so if you have a personality like Peter, I'm going to say don't get down on yourself about it, embrace it, but don't stop there and just make excuses for the way that you are. And it goes with all of these different personalities. We can't just say, I am this way and I'm never going to change because God just made me this way. Like, I have to really be careful when Rob and I are talking to just not say, well, no, this is just the way it is. Like, I have to really consciously say, God, you got to let me, I need to listen to him. I need to stop trying to be right all the time. Because my personality says that, but if I stay that way, I'm just going to be a witch to Rob the entire time we're married, and I'm going to think that I'm always right. I can't be that way. So I want God to take what he's given me, but I want him to temper that with love and compassion and kindness and all the things that he wants to do. We can't get stuck over here with just, I am just the way I am. Okay, second, Andrew, his brother, little Andrew. Andrew, imagine being the brother to Peter, okay? That would not be a really great position to be in, because Peter probably told Andrew what to do all of his life, and Andrew probably got pretty sick of it. Now, Andrew is the least known. You've got Peter, James, and John, who are always, you always see them with Jesus. And every so often you see Andrew join that crowd. So if we look at Mark 13:3, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew were questioning him privately. So we see Andrew as part of that team every so often, but he's not part of the main three. His brother is. But the interesting thing is that Andrew comes to Christ first. Like hears about him, goes to see him, probably hears about him through John the Baptist, goes to see him. John 1:40, we'll start there. One of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He found first his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which translated means Christ. He brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, the son of John, and shall be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. So what we see with Andrew is that he's not this big, bold personality that Peter has, but he has this total evangelistic heart. Like he just sees people. Peter sees crowds. Andrew sees people. And you would think that when he went to his brother, you wondered if he was thinking in the back of his mind, if I tell Pete about Jesus and he joins Team Jesus, then I'm just going to be a nobody and no one's going to pay attention to me and it's all going to be about Pete once again, like we've grown up all of our life. And so you're wondering if he felt any of these things, but you never see this. Like you see the very first person he runs to is Peter. Because I think in his mind he's thinking, if I actually get Peter to come to Christ, oh my gosh, we can rock this world for Jesus because of his personality. But you see, Andrew's just different. He's evangelistic at heart, and he always lived in the shadow, but it didn't seem to bother him at all when it came to Christ. Andrew had a willingness to share the gospel regardless of whatever. The other day, we were driving along, and Dusty he was sitting next to me, and he had his feet up on the dash, okay, which is where the airbag is. And we were just driving along, stopped at a stoplight, and somebody rolled down their window and was trying to get our attention. So I rolled down the window thinking I had a flat tire or something, and he said, I just want you to know that if you put your feet up on the airbag thing, if you got in an accident, it would probably kill you. And he said, I know that because of personal experience in my life when something really bad happened, and I just want you to know that. And I was so shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much that you cared that much to stop, roll down the window, and tell me that, because that was how important it was. So I drove away and I said, oh my gosh, we should share the gospel that way. Like we just pull up at a stoplight, roll down our window, and we just be like, hey, there's a heaven, there's a hell. Do you know where you're going? Because you got to follow Jesus if you want to go to heaven. So I told Cheyenne that, and she goes, Mom, that's just so creepy. Like people would never come to Jesus that way. But I thought, here's a man, and this man reminded me of Andrew. Like he didn't really care who I was, or he just wanted me to know that something bad could happen if we didn't do what he asked us to do. And so that's when I saw him, I thought, that's what Andrew's like. He kind of gave me a good thing. So it doesn't matter who talks the most or who's the loudest. Every single person in this whole crew of people and everyone here, we all have different gifts. So I want to go through real quick 1 Corinthians 12. We're going to start in verse 12 because I want to remind us that you are not like me and I am not like you, and we're all different. And that's a really good thing because we're a body. We're not, it's like if my whole body was just like a nose, okay? That would be kind of weird. Like I couldn't talk and I couldn't hear. I could smell really good, but I couldn't, that would be the extent of it. So we have different parts to our body that make up a body. So, verse 12, for even as the body is one and yet has many members, all the members of the body, though they are many, are one body, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jew or Greek, whether slave or free, or we were all made to drink in one Spirit. So basically he's saying, if you and I are believers in Jesus, we're all one. It doesn't matter whether you come from the Baptist church or the Pentecostal. If you know Christ, we're one particular body. For the body is not one member but many. If the foot says, because I'm not a hand, I'm not a part of the body, it is not for this reason any the less a part of the body. And if the ear says, because I am not an eye, I am not a part of the body, is it not for this reason any the less a part of the body? I don't have my glasses on, so if that didn't come out right, I'm trying to read it and not have glasses. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? And now God has placed the members, each one of them, in the body just as he desired. Now that was a really key thing to me when I read that, because I thought, so many people are like, well, I want to be this, or I want to do this, or I want to be like Chris, or I want to be organized like Aaron, or I want to be that way. And God's like going, you know what? I made you the way that you are. I did that as he desired. So when you start feeling that way, you can sit back and say, you know what? God made me special the way I am, because that's what he desired for me. Wonder where I'm at. Desire. Okay, verse 19. If they were all one member, where would the body be? And now there are many members, but one body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Or again, the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, it is much truer the members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary, those members of the body which we deem less honorable, on these we bestow more abundant honor, and one less presentable members become much more presentable. Whereas our more presentable members have no need of it, but God has so composed the body, giving more abundant honor to that member which is lacked, so that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. And if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now you are in Christ's body and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church, and this is one of these are you. Okay, first apostles and prophets and teachers and miracles and gifts of healing, helps, administration, various kinds of tongues. Are all not apostles, are they? All are not prophets, are they? All are not teachers, are they? All are not workers of miracles, are they? All do not have gifts of healing. All do not speak in tongues. All do not interpret, but earnestly desire the greater gifts, and I show you a still more excellent way. So he's saying to all of us, every one of us has something different, and that's a really, really good thing, because all of us together make up the body. Now, I look around here, and I look around the room, and I told you a couple, I don't know when it was, that we need someone to come along and pray, because we're getting a lot of people on Facebook. They're needing things. They're needing help. So I said, if anyone wants to pray. So my little Laura, Laura, if you ever need prayer, I will send your prayer request to her. She's my little, but she said, I would love to do that. Okay. I'm really bad at that. Like, she keeps track of these Facebook girls, and she just told me last night, she said, I heard back from some of them, and I've been able to talk to them and encourage them. And that's just a gift. Like, it is just not one that I have, but I am so thankful for her, because that's just something that I can't do. And then I look at Chris and Galen, who stand out front, and they genuinely love people. Like, you come to them and they'll hug you and they'll ask about your day and how are you, and they'll go to lunch with you, and they just totally do that. And that's like a great thing. And they love to socialize and they love to go to lunch. I called Chris the other day at 12:15 for something, and she didn't answer. And here's my message. Oh yeah, I forgot. It's between 11 and 1. You're at lunch with somebody eating and talking, because that's just who you are. But it's a good thing. Like, we need her in the body, because I'm not good at that. Like, I'm really bad at that. So I was thinking I'm more of a loner, and we talked about this the other day. I don't know why. I think it's because I like to read and I like to study, and I can't really do that when I'm talking. So that's kind of my thing over here. So to go and do what they do, I'm just horrible at it. I've told this to you before. It's my one thing that makes sense to me. So if you've heard this, just sleep through this. My sister owns signatures. I know I've told this to you before. But Christmas time, one time, she said, I need some help with the Christmas tree. So I went to help her with the Christmas tree. All day long, all I could hear was, hi, I'm so glad welcome to Signatures. I'm so happy that you're here. Oh my gosh, how's your husband? How's your kids? Oh, I mean, this one, I was like, by the end of the day, just kill me now, okay? I just was so, who does this all day long? Like, I just wanted to hide. I just wanted to just put the thing on the tree quietly. I don't want to know your problems. I don't care. Okay. But it's just her personality. It's who she is. And I had a lady one day, she came up and she said, I'm donating money to your ministry. She said, because I can give money, but I can't really stand in the line at a grocery store and tell people about Jesus. But then I started playing that out, and I thought, you know what's cool about that is that her money pays for postcards and one-way books so that anyone who can do that now we can have these, tools available because she played her part and now you can play your part. It all just fits together really, really good. I can't be like Chris. I never will be. I can't be like Laura. I wish I could, but then I realize we're all different and that's just the way we are. So, okay, I have no idea where I'm at. What time is it? Is it 10 o'clock? How is that even possible? Apparently, I talk too much. Ugh. All right. Well, okay. Well, we've made it through Andrew and Peter, apparently. So I guess next week we'll finish with Andrew, and then we got a couple stories to read, and we won't make it through all 12, but we'll make it through some of them. So, okay. Hopefully, we got the point today. Everyone's different.